Hi, everybody. Welcome into the summer edition of Coyotes Corner alongside Dave Vest. I'm Luke Lapinski. Dave, how you doing over there?
I'm very well, Luke. Is it summer yet?
It's 115 degrees outside, so hopefully this is summer.
It's late spring, technically.
Yeah, I guess that's true. This is the Phoenix equivalent of spring. We got a lot to talk about.
We do, but first, like you said, 120 next week. Are you ready?
No.
Okay.
I'm leaving, actually, and so are you.
Well, you're going to Vegas, where it'll be 119.
It'll be 119. I gotta shave 1 degree off the temperature. You're going to Chicago, where
Correct.
it probably won't even be that much cooler.
It probably won't when you factor in humidity
Yeah.
and the lake, and I'm sure that has something to do with the
I love it when you go
temperature, I think.
meteorologist on the on the podcast. You know, the lake, it's all science. So, Dave will be at the NHL draft next Friday.
Correct.
I will be at the expansion draft on Wednesday, or when they announce the actual players that are taken on Wednesday. So
That also is correct. So we've got it all covered. And before we even start, let's just invite people to check in to ArizonaCoyotes.com. Shameless plug right off the bat.
I thought you were going to say invite people to come along with us on the road trips.
Well, they can if they want.
I mean, why not? Everybody knows where Vegas and Chicago are. But yeah, ArizonaCoyotes.com for all your latest info. And I'm assuming that's where you found this podcast. So carry on. All right, we've got a lot to look forward to, but we also, since we haven't done one of these really since the end of the regular season,
right,
we've got some stuff to look back on. In fact, Dave has this very elaborate whiteboard up there, and I noticed you didn't even write Stanley Cup playoffs up there.
I didn't.
So
Good point.
Maybe we'll get to that at the very end.
Let's do that. I know you're dying to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, so I will allow you, 90 seconds at the end?
I didn't hear your predictions this year, so now I want to know if you actually had your predictions right. I guess you could just make that up, and nobody would ever know. Let's start with the draft and draft lottery.
Sure. Yeah. The draft lottery, obviously, that was at the end of April.
Yeah.
It seems like quite a while ago if you base it on how many playoff games we've all watched in between.
Yeah. Lots of hockey.
I believe the Rangers were playing the Senators at that point.
Jeez.
Some crazy game where Ottawa rallied. Do you recall?
That was a fun series. It was an underrated fun series. Ottawa they were interesting. They had a lot of those 5-6, 5-4 games against the Rangers for some reason. But anyway, yes, the draft lottery, the Coyotes will pick 7th. They'll pick 23rd, which leads us into the draft that is coming up next Friday. And once again, the Coyotes have some flexibility and some assets on draft day, which we saw what John Chaika was able to do with that last year. And
worked out pretty well.
Yeah, all returns were pretty good last year, so we'll see if he can duplicate that.
Yeah, 7 picks overall, 2 in the first round. This is the third year in a row, Luke, that the Coyotes will have 2 picks in the first round. And, of course, that's assuming that no trades are made between now and then. But 2 picks in the first round and then 5 other picks over the next 6 rounds. So that's how it stands now, 7 picks total. Should be very interesting to see how this plays out. It's going to be a different type of draft this year because there isn't that hysteria at the top of the draft.
Yeah.
And I say that with reference to the last 2 drafts where you had Connor McDavid and Jack Eichel as 1-2, and then last year Austin Matthews and Patrick Laine 1-2. You know, obviously there will be players taking 1-2 this year, but they're not considered.
We're not retiring those top 2 spots this year.
The players at the top of this year's draft are not considered generational franchise-saving players that were featured at the last 2 drafts.
You could make the argument that the actual draft itself has more drama this year. I mean, obviously the draft lottery the last couple of years when you have McDavid and Matthews, who are such generational talents. And by the way, they've lived up to the hype so far every step of the way. But people that are just kind of jumping into the sport over the last couple of years are probably looking around saying, well, there's no McDavid this year. Well, there also wasn't a McDavid for 10 years before McDavid. They are generational talents. They just happen to come in back-to-back years. So, yeah, the lottery was exciting the last couple of years, but the actual draft itself, you figure Nolan Patrick, you figure Nico Hischier, but you don't even know what order those 2 are going.
Right.
And
there's no consensus on who's going to be first and second.
And then after that, it's craziness.
It is. From 3 on, it's, not anybody's guess because we all know, the teams know, but as far as the media trying to predict it, I've seen at least 5 mock drafts, and after 1-2, I've seen 5 different 3s.
Oh, yeah.
So it should be very exciting. And I talked to Tim Bernhardt, the Coyotes director of amateur scouting, just yesterday, and he said, true, this draft doesn't have the buzz because of the high-end talent, but it's going to be very fun to watch it play out. And, of course, every team is situated to react to what the team above it does. So that'll be more in play this year than in recent drafts for sure.
And there's a lot of talk too that, we see all the mock drafts and we see like the central scouting lists and those lists that come out and everything, but each team has their own specific draft board for, their order for the top 10 or top 15 or whatever. And last couple of years, everybody had McDavid number 1 or Matthews number 1. And you got the consensus that most teams had players in pretty similar ranges. Like somebody may have one guy number 4 and somebody else has him 5 or 6. But this year, depending who you talk to, there's a lot of people that feel like each team's boards are going to be so different than everybody else's that you're right. It's really just going to come down to what the team in front of you takes, and if you feel like you need to go based on need. There's so many centers in the top 10 and defensemen. There's one winger typically listed in the top 10. That's Owen Tippett, who is not related to Dave Tippett, but is supposed to be a really exciting player too. So it's going to be really it's going to be different this year. It's going to be the way it was a few years ago, and people get caught up in there's no Austin Matthews, this isn't a good draft. There's not the generational guy on top. There are going to be guys from this draft that play in all-star games. Like you can't go so far the other way where you just think the draft is useless. There's going to be very good players in this draft.
And Luke, the Coyotes, like every team in the NHL, they're going to play it close to the vest and not reveal, the names of the players that they're going to draft here. But you and I can speculate here on this podcast simply by looking at what the Coyotes have done in recent drafts and where they stand organizationally, if that's a word.
It is.
In terms of position. Let's do that right now. Okay. Last year at the draft, the Coyotes had 5 picks, and they ended up drafting 4 defensemen out of the 5 picks, and they also acquired Anthony DeAngelo. So you would think, just based on that, hey, we're good on D, let's focus on forwards. Then you look at the forwards in this system, there's a lot of good quality forwards. So I don't know. When you look at that and think about it, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. Last year they went Clayton Keller with the first pick, and then it was all D the rest of the way. And it was pretty clear last year if there was any sort of area of need in the farm system, it was defense. And I give John Chaika a lot of credit because he stepped in his first summer with the team and instantly addressed that by taking all those defensemen in the draft, swinging that deal for Anthony DeAngelo. Obviously, the move up to get Jacob Chychrun looks brilliant at this point. I don't think anybody around the league would second guess that. It's worked out very well so far for the Coyotes. But when you look at this year, if we're just going based on what we've seen John do in his one other draft, I mean, I expect them to be active, whether they move or not, at least kind of looking to see if there's any angles they can play to move up or move down and acquire, a player for now or whatever. Specifically with that 7th pick, most of the mock drafts that you see out there, most of the rankings do have about 6 centers and 3 defensemen in the top 10. And then, as I mentioned, Owen Tippett. The Coyotes don't necessarily need a winger, but Owen Tippett is also has the upside to be the best goal scorer in this draft. So it's not inconceivable they would go that direction, but there's a lot of centers, and you can never have too many centers. So I would think if they stay at number 7 and there's a center that, like I said, is high on their board, that maybe they have 3rd or 4th overall and he's somehow there at 7, they might go that direction. But you're right, it's speculation.
Okay, so that's the NHL draft, and it's coming up on June 23rd and 24th in Chicago for the first time ever, which surprised me. The draft being staged in Chicago.
That is kind of silly, isn't it?
Considering it's an original 6 team and a great city to have an event. Nonetheless, this is the first year in Chicago. You can watch it on television. NBC Sports Network is doing the first round on Friday. On Saturday, the whole rounds 2 through 7 on NHL Network. Of course, there'll be a draft party, as always, for the Coyotes this year's. Again, Luke will be there. Why don't you tell us all about it, where it is?
That one's out at the Ice Den in Scottsdale. Arizona Sports will be there as well. Bob Heathouse is flying back for an appearance for that one. That's always a good time. The last couple of years it's been here at the arena, but before that it had been at the Ice Den. It's a cool experience, especially when you have a couple picks like the Coyotes do. I mean, again, it's possible they trade them, but if they trade them, that's big news as well. And so it's just kind of it's like a summer oasis, Dave, where it's just like hockey right in the middle of the summer, and you're at a rink and there's sheets of ice. It's pretty fun.
Okay, before that,
this all could go out the window because of the expansion draft.
Right. So you kind of touched on it earlier when you mentioned you were going to Las Vegas next week, and of course that's the site of the NHL awards, the annual awards, but this year much different because they've incorporated the NHL expansion draft into the award show. So it's like 2 shows in one.
Yeah.
And they did that, of course, so the expansion team, the Vegas Golden Knights, can get a roster and enter play in the 2017-18 season. So this is all going to happen within the next week, and we're going to know who the Knights have on their roster very, very soon. The expansion draft. Why don't you give us your cliff notes of the expansion draft, what's coming up, how the Coyotes are involved?
I'm excited about this. I know that the league has expanded before. I don't think they've ever done it quite like this. I was at the award show last year, and whatever it was, 3 hours before the award show, they officially announced that Vegas was getting the team because the award show was in Vegas, so that's a good place to do it. And the award show will be this year at their new arena right there. It's right behind New York off the Strip. So there's always the buzz because you just have media members from all over the country there for the awards show, and there's players there that are winning these awards. But to have the expansion draft mixed in, I'm really glad that the league is making it into a show, because there was a lot of talk that teams would just submit their list of protected players, and then Vegas would pick their rosters, and we just it would almost be a footnote. You got to make a show out of it. This is because it's so unique, and
it's Vegas.
It is Vegas. So you're right. You got to make a show out of everything.
Is Cirque du Soleil a part of all this, or some sort of Elvis impersonator?
I would assume it will be announced by somebody dressed like Elvis. I mean, why wouldn't it be? The real quick rules for the draft: every team protects a goalie, and then you either protect 8 skaters or 7 forwards and 3 defensemen, and that's kind of where the strategy comes in for some of these teams that have 4 or 5 defensemen they want to protect. I know Anaheim is a team like that. For the Coyotes are actually in a really good spot because you don't have to protect guys that are in their first or second year. So
right, and about 2/3 of the team qualify for that.
So the Coyotes don't have to protect Max Domi or Jacob Chikrin or any of those guys. They're already safe, so that's a good thing. But what it opens up spots for the Coyotes feasibly, and this would have to happen pretty quickly, so I don't know if it will happen or not, but they could feasibly make a trade before the expansion draft and basically get a team that has, like Minnesota, I know has too many players that they need to protect. If you're Minnesota, do you want to give your player to Vegas, or do you want to trade him to the Coyotes or a team like the Coyotes for an asset? So that's where things could get interesting leading up to the draft.
Okay. Very interesting. We could talk about the expansion draft on its own for 30 minutes.
Yes.
But we won't. We'll leave it at that, and we'll just advise everybody to just keep a keen eye on ArizonaCoyotes.com, NHL.com, NHL Network as all this unfolds over the weekend.
And you said this off the air, too. It's worth repeating. The Coyotes will lose a player in the draft. They will only lose one player in the draft.
Unless, to my understanding, Vegas passes on any of the Coyotes players. I don't believe they're required to take one player from every team.
And the Coyotes could add players before the draft. But you can't lose more than one. That's the point.
Right.
No matter who you are.
Keep that in mind. Worst case scenario. Absolute worst case scenario. The Coyotes will lose one player. All right. So I thought we were going to do all that at the end, but we, on the fly, shifted the podcast and did everything coming up first.
You got to adjust as things are unfolding in front of you.
No problem. Mr. Adjustments, they call them.
Do we want to look back a little bit now? We'll mix it up and look back at some of the things, just sprinkle them in, some news and notes that have happened in the last month and a half?
Absolutely. There's so much on that board there. I had to start cramming in and font sizes, that you might see on prescription bottles or something.
You still have your bank account access and password numbers up there. Should I read those out or no?
Bosco.
Okay. All right, so the World Championships took place.
They did.
And Oliver Ekman-Larsson was one of the stars.
He was, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson won a gold medal. He and his Team Sweden teammates, they went on and made a nice little run there when it mattered most, and they captured the gold medal. For Oliver, obviously a huge moment in his life, given what he went through the past year, of course, with the injuries that he played through, and much more importantly, the issues with his mother, who sadly passed away towards the end of the regular season. Oliver, of course, left the Coyotes at the very end to go back to Sweden to be with his family. He wasn't sure he was even going to play in this tournament, but I had a chance to speak with him after the fact, and he said that he and his family decided that his mother would want him to play in this tournament. He played in the tournament, and he played with his mother foremost on his mind and won for her. The first gold medal he's ever won. He's played for Sweden on many, many occasions.
Surprising.
And this is the first time he won gold. And in speaking to him, it was just, you could tell in his voice how much it meant to him. So kudos to Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He was just one of many Coyotes playing in that event.
Well, we should know, too, he scored in the shootout in the game-winning game. So
he did.
It was cool not only to see him get his first gold medal, as you said, and like you said, the year he's had. I'm glad he was able to play, and not only that, have success. It was good to just see him out there looking like Oliver Ekman-Larsson again. But then, for your coach to have enough confidence to put a defenseman in the shootout with the the World Championship on the line, and of course he comes through. I mean, that was a nice twist there right at the very end.
Yeah, it was funny because he mentioned that in a game played earlier in the tournament, he took a shootout shot and kind of mishandled the puck, and it had no chance of going in, so he wasn't even expecting to get another chance. And there he was, like you said, with the medal on the line, and I believe he was the second shooter for Team Sweden.
And we see him in practice. I mean, when the Coyotes do the shootout drills, Oliver's good in the shootout. Coyotes fans have seen him in the actual games in the shootout too, but you're right, he missed the one earlier in the tournament, and he didn't even really get a great shot off, so it was nice to see him back out there and then have him convert too.
So Oliver won a medal. There were 4 other players for the Coyotes in this event, and none of them, unfortunately for them, won a medal, which was surprising because Team USA, which had 3 Coyotes on it, they just kind of breezed through the preliminary round. They won 7 games in a row at one point, and then they got into the quarterfinals and were shut out by Finland.
Finland is that weird team that, they win the World Junior Championships 2 years ago. They almost get relegated this past year. And whatever they do in the preliminary round, just expect the opposite in the actual medal round. And unfortunately for the U.S., they were on the wrong side of that. But Clayton Keller was, I believe, the youngest player in the tournament.
Correct.
And he was one of the top goal scorers in the entire tournament.
Yes. In fact, he had a hat trick in one of the prelim games. It was the first American hat trick in quite a while, maybe 3-4 years, I believe. But, it was really kind of a coming out party for Clayton Keller in a ways. I mean, obviously he was the 7th overall pick and he played for the Coyotes last season, but he really thrived in this tournament. And
that's twice now on the international stage since the Coyotes have drafted him. In the World Junior Championships, he was excellent, but you would kind of expect that because he's playing against guys his own age.
Right, that's the key point.
NHL All-Stars basically in the World Championship.
Absolutely. So great tournament for Clayton Keller. Connor Murphy was named captain of Team USA.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that in itself is just amazing that USA Hockey put that amount of trust into Connor Murphy in this event, which is a huge deal for USA Hockey. I know it's not the Olympics or things that hockey fans around the world, or maybe I should rephrase that, hockey fans in North America are focused on. Obviously, the playoffs are going on in the NHL.
That's the only complicating factor is people here are so focused on the playoffs.
Right, but worldwide, this is a huge tournament.
It's still an all-star tournament.
Yes.
And, we talked so much about the next generation of Coyotes leadership when we talk about Oliver and how, at least I think he'll eventually be the captain someday. And Max Domi is a really good potential assistant. I mean, we're looking a ways down the road here, but Connor Murphy just captained Team USA. That's not nothing.
Captain America.
No, look at that. I like that.
So Murphy was team captain, and they had a nice run there through the prelims. The other player on Team USA from the Coyotes, Christian Dvorak, his stats, they're kind of they don't knock you over, but he was asked to play a defensive role. And I spoke to Connor Murphy about how Dvorak fit into the role he was asked to play, and he said he did a great job. He was often the subject of videos when the team was reviewing how to play in this tournament.
Oh, nice.
The coaches were showing Christian Dvorak. So I got that from Connor Murphy. Dvorak also, he did chip in a couple of points, but that wasn't really what he was asked to do.
Saw a little bit of power play time, but you're right.
Yeah.
He was... Look, that just fits in with what we've seen from Dvorak so far since the Coyotes drafted him. Of whatever you ask him to do, he can just do it.
Toby Reeder also played in this tournament, and it was in his host country, so I know he was thrilled to be a part of it. Unfortunately, he got hurt, I believe, in the second or third game for Team Germany, and he missed the rest of the tournament. Second year in a row that's happened to him. He since has had surgery on his ankle, one of his ankles, and he's expected to make a full recovery by training camp. So 5 players over in the World Championship for the Coyotes. Great experience for all those guys, all young players, just building their resumes and getting valuable experience, and I think that was achieved by all of them.
On this side of the globe, Dylan Strome, just a crazy run through the OHL playoffs with Erie. They ended up dominating the playoffs and winning that title, and then they go to the Memorial Cup, and they actually end up not winning the Memorial Cup, but he was pretty clearly the standout player in the Memorial Cup for any of the teams. He set a record for most points in a game.
7 points, 1 game.
In the Memorial Cup, which is basically, it's kind of the hockey equivalent of like the Final Four for college football or basketball here in the United States. And yeah, Dylan Strome just took over one of those games.
He did, and he was named MVP of the tournament. So, that speaks for itself. His stats were crazy. and his leadership on that team. You really, if you watch those games, you could see that he was the guy on that team. They have a lot of talented players, but he's the glue on that team, and that was quite obvious to me. Even off the ice, and the comments I saw him making when things were going their way, when things weren't going their way. Dylan Strome was the man for the Erie Otters. That's the end of his junior career, and he leaves as an OHL champion.
He had quite the year. I mean, he comes up, he makes the Coyotes out of camp, gets some playing time here for a little bit, but doesn't burn a year of a year off his NHL contract, goes back down. But Dave Tippett has referenced this a few times. It's not like Dylan Strome was up with the Coyotes for 4 days. He was here actually for a couple weeks, got to sort of learn the ins and outs of being a pro, and then basically went back to junior and played junior hockey like a pro. And we expected him to go down there and dominate stats-wise, which he did. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were absurd. It was like 30. He ended up playing, I don't want to give the wrong numbers, but they were very good numbers over the course of basically half a season with Erie. He was still one of the top scorers in the OHL. But then he goes out there and he's a huge part of Canada and the World Juniors. He goes and wins the OHL title, and like you said, the Memorial Cup MVP. You couldn't ask for a better final junior season out of Dylan Strome. Everything they were hoping he would get to experience, he not only experienced it, but he experienced it at a very high level and accomplished a lot.
Big summer for Dylan. His junior career's over, so he'll either make the Coyotes team or he'll be down in Tucson in the AHL. It's up to him, is what I've been told.
And he knows it's a big summer. And, this from talking to him, he's such a student of the game. I know sometimes that phrase gets tossed around, but ask Dylan Strome anything that's happened in the world of hockey in the last 30 years, and he knows it.
Okay, let's move on and speak about some things going on in the hockey ops department.
Let's do it. A couple good moves here.
Steve Sullivan is now the assistant general manager. He moves up from his role in player development to assistant GM. Thoughts?
Well, I think it's safe to say that the Coyotes are pretty happy with the player development over the last couple of years. I mean, we talk about all these high-end prospects that they've drafted over the last 3, 4, 5 years, but it doesn't mean anything if they're not developing. Look at last year, they're developing. Brendan Perlini, you mentioned Christian Dvorak, Jacob Chychrun almost instantly. Some of that is the player and just their ridiculous talent, but some of that is the development, and Steve Sullivan had a pretty big hand in that. So, and I just named a couple of the players. I mean, there's more. So it's fitting.
Yes, and Steve will remain, in the realm of player development. He's not just going to abandon, what he's done in that area. He's going to be the general manager for the Tucson Roadrunners. I can't think of a role more important to development than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's still guys, like you said, Dylan Strome will either start here or there this upcoming year. Clayton Keller's another guy. Christian Fisher. Yeah, so there's... It's good, and I'm glad that you mentioned that too for people. He's not just moving up and getting promoted, and all of a sudden he's not doing what he was doing. He still gets to do that too, which I think again has worked out pretty well for the Coyotes so far.
And this story probably deserves its own podcast as well. The Craig Cunningham situation, which is simply amazing. We've talked about Craig's situation before on this podcast, but now that it's moving forward, in case people haven't heard, the Coyotes have hired Craig Cunningham to be a pro scout for the team. And I think it's just a terrific move. I think Craig will be a good pro scout. He loves hockey. He said at the beginning of this process, I have to learn how to do this, but I'm going to put everything I have into it like I did to becoming an NHL player. And I have every confidence that he will, and he'll be a good one. And a quick note, too, if you haven't seen it, ESPN is running a mini documentary on Craig Cunningham. You can go to their YouTube page or their website and check it out. Tom Rinaldi is the host. Very well done. Tells a nice story of Craig and where he was and where he is now. But your thoughts on Craig Cunningham?
I remember the last podcast that you and I did was just a couple days after the end of the regular season, and we talked about how emotional of a last night of the season it was, not only because of all the stuff with Shane Doan and Fan Appreciation Night, but Craig Cunningham kind of stole the show with all the, with him going out there and skating a little bit beforehand and dropping the puck and everything. And I don't. What else can you say about him? Just his personality and his sort of resilience and the fact that he really does have a good hockey mind. And I remember even that night he said, "I still want to be involved in hockey. I'm just not 100% sure in what capacity yet." And I don't know if it was him or somebody else. I think it was him actually that mentioned maybe a scout that night. And so it's great to see him do it. He's obviously going to be one of the youngest scouts around the NHL, but everything we've seen him do, he didn't have the easiest path to get to play professional hockey, and
exactly.
When he sets his mind to it, he does it. So I don't doubt him here.
Okay, so looking at the board, I think we're going back to looking ahead. We're all over the board here.
Well, no, but look, it's
the
summer podcast. Anything goes.
Late spring,
right? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, late spring. We're doing another one of these. What, after the draft? Probably a couple weeks.
Sure. But
free agency too. We'll wait maybe a few weeks. But
it's going to be crazy in terms of the schedule. Very hectic because the draft, as we mentioned, the 23rd and the 24th.
Yes.
That's Friday, Saturday. Sunday's the 25th, if I'm any judge of Sundays. And then the 26th is the first day of development camp, which is different this year.
Yeah, it's earlier, isn't it?
Yes.
It's definitely earlier.
Usually there's a week in between the draft and the development camp. Not the case this year. Going right into it. So everyone's going to hustle back here, and that Monday morning, it's going to start. So we invite fans to join us. The fans are welcome at the development camp. This year, it's being held in Peoria, which is right down the street from the arena here where we're doing this podcast. The on-ice sessions are all listed on the website. I can just tell you the days off the top of my head. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. Then on Friday at 6 o'clock, there's going to be a game between the prospects to cap the camp, as has been the case the past few years. So the fans are invited to all the on-ice sessions, and like every year, it's just a nice way to come out, get a sense of the guys that the team just drafted, and also to get a sense of some of the progress being made by other picks in recent drafts.
Yeah. It's a fun time, and like you said, this is a busy couple weeks here, which you don't look necessarily at the end of June and be like, oh yeah, okay, this is when hockey really takes off. And yeah, there's definitely a lull in the middle of July, but expansion draft and then the actual draft and then prospect development camp all within basically 10 days, all crammed in there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And the development camp is, it's a good time. You get out of the heat and you come inside and you go to an ice rink and watch some high-end talent play hockey, but you can pick up some stuff too. I remember a couple years ago watching a couple players that really stood out that are now playing with the team. Last year, Clayton Keller in the prospects game, I mean, he stood out instantly. And again, these are some of the top prospects. You have to remember the Coyotes have one of the top prospect groups in the NHL. That's pretty widely accepted around the league. But for Clayton Keller to just, he was everywhere with the puck last year. He was somebody that really stood out.
And he will be at this year's Dev Camp. Clayton Keller, Dylan Strome, Christian Fischer, Nick Merkley. Those are just a few of the guys that have committed to come to this camp. And don't forget, also in attendance will be the guys the Coyotes draft in Chicago.
Yeah, so we don't even know who they are yet.
We don't, as I stumble through that because I didn't know who they were or what I was saying.
Why don't you just predict who they are for us, Dave? It would make the podcast a lot easier. I mean, that way we could put names to these numbers. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of players that also know each other, that have histories through junior hockey or whatever. And in the case of a guy like Clayton Keller, or Dylan Strome, or even Christian Fischer, guys that have already played a little bit in the NHL. And you mentioned this is a big summer for Dylan Strome, and it is. It's big for Keller. It's big for Fischer as well. Those are three guys. They're not the only three guys with a chance to make this team either out of camp or throughout the season. But I think they're probably the top three everybody's watching right now.
All right, so to recap, a lot has happened for the Coyotes, and a lot is about to happen. How's that?
That's very poetic, Dave.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else here we want to hit before
I don't.
we wrap
I think
up?
the board is clean, Luke.
Okay. I have to ask you one thing about the actual playoffs.
Oh, right. Let's talk about that.
Nashville and the way that they just... I loved seeing Nashville in the Cup. I really did.
Are you talking about the team or the city?
Just the city.
Okay.
The city. No, it's...
The team kind of let me down. I'm just going to say that. They played so well in the Western Conference playoffs, and then I thought in the final against the Penguins, they let game one slip away. They should have won that. In the last two games, they didn't even score a goal. I thought they kind of just ran out of steam. But the city,
yeah.
I'll let you go on about it because I can see it written on your face how much you enjoyed that. They really embraced this.
Make it sound like I have Smashville written across my forehead in marker. I liked stuff like that. Makes me think of what it's like here when the Coyotes make the playoffs and how great it was when they made that run to the Western Conference Final and how it completely captured this city's attention, sports fans of any sport. And ironically, one of the teams they took out on that path that year was Nashville. But I just thought it was very good for the sport to see. I think it was helpful to have a team like Pittsburgh there because they were able to go back-to-back, and we haven't seen that in almost 20 years. So I think that certainly helped. But I thought that it was nice to also have a different component where you have a team from a non-traditional market, if you're going to use that term, get there and just have crazy support. And I just thought it was great for the sport on obviously its biggest stage.
Absolutely, I agree. It was fun. Those games that were played in Nashville were events, and you couldn't help but get caught up with what those people were experiencing for the first time. You have to tip your hat to the Penguins. Just amazing what they've accomplished to win the Cup back-to-back. Quite challenging. They did it without Chris Letang, their best defenseman.
That was the part that shocked me. Last year didn't shock me. It's always weird when Washington's so strange because they have the best record every year, and then so it's tough to pick against them in the playoffs. And obviously Pittsburgh took them out each of the last 2 years. But last year you looked at it and you said Pittsburgh's got a pretty good team. This year they obviously had a good team too, but to do it without Chris Letang is...
Well, here's a news flash for you. Sidney Crosby's pretty good.
Well, and he's probably playing his best hockey ever, really, in the last 12, 13 months. So it was a fun tournament across the board. You're right. The actual Stanley Cup itself wasn't nearly as dramatic as the first 3 rounds were, but it's a lot of fun. And the best part about it is we're not that far away from next season.
And this podcast was a lot of fun. I've missed you, Luke.
Oh, Dave, that's probably the nicest thing you've ever said, not only to me, but to anybody. All right, so Dave said something nice about me. I'm going to go out on a high note. Thanks to Doug Cannon, who produced this podcast for us. As always, thanks to Dave Vest. I'm Luke Lapinski. Thanks to you for listening to Coyotes Corner.